I'll start with a review for this book or course. I'm going to refer this as a book. How You Decide: The Science of Human Decision Making. I really liked the book or the course. I'm going to give this 5 stars. Very interesting. Really like the professor. He's very clear. He has great examples and breaks down everything very well. Also like the combination of that where he gets most of his ideas and theories is from two main books. One of them is Thinking Fast and Slow, which I love that book, and the second book is Influence. Both of those books I really liked, and I really like the combination. There is also like some neuroscience, and some behavioral economics, some economics. It's a good combination of many things that I generally like, and I would definitely recommend this. Let's see the notes. Those who had spending limits ended up spending more than those who didn't. So if you have a limit, usually you would end up spending more. You can ask why. That's why we have this one. Spending limit increases spending because we are more likely to find something that would suit that budget. If you have set $100, you're more likely to find something that is close to it. If you didn't know, you didn't set a budget, you're more likely to find something cheaper. Boundary conditions are where boundaries of the theory goes to. How far are the boundaries? So those are the boundary conditions. Internal validity is cause and effect, while external validity is generalizing to other stuff. That's the differences between internal to external validity. Internal validity is the actual cause and effect. If we can find evidence. External validity is generalizing into other stuff. That usually is harder. System 2 is deliberate and can be controlled. The system can also train System 1. So that's System 1 and System 2. System 2 is more deliberate and controllable, and it can also train System 1. System 2 can lose access to some knowledge, such as walking, which would be done weirdly if done consciously. So System 2 doesn't have access to all information, many things just being delegated to System 1. And walking, even though walking firstly is done by System 2, eventually System 2 lose access, and if we do try to use System 2 for walking, we're going to do it in a very weird way. System 2 can approve, reject, neglect, or influence System 1. So that's what usually the things that System 2 does. It can either approve, so it starts like a kind of a debate between System 1 to System 2, reject whatever System 1 offered, neglect, just not paying attention, or influence System 1. It can also influence it indirectly. An example of availability, the availability heuristic, is people thinking gun violence is increasing while it went down by half. There's a lot of mass shootings. People tend to think that gun violence is increasing even though it's down by half. Frequent popcorn eaters ate more stale popcorn due to the habit even while knowing it was stale. So they knew it was stale, but they ate more of those who were not frequent popcorn eaters. The reason is because it was just a habit and they couldn't resist it. System 2 requires most of the energy, or if you may, electricity. It consumes a lot of the electricity, because it uses electricity essentially, and it uses most of it compared to System 1. The brain, generally speaking, is consuming, I think, around 20% of the energy. Decision making falls under the executive functions and is also subject to depletion. That's where decision making takes place in the executive function, prefrontal cortex, and this is also it's also subject to depletion. We use it more, we are less likely to be good at it. It's like a muscle. It's gonna be tired. third places are happier than second places because they at least got something while second places almost got the first place. So it's all about where perspective in a way, because if you're third place, you almost got nothing. But if you're second place, you were very close to get the first. If you're second place, you were very close to get. If you're second, you almost got first, and this doesn't feel good. People are willing to drive to get a discount only when the percentage of saving is large enough. So it's all about percentage, not about numbers specifically. So even if you can save $5 out of 10, you would do it. But $5 out of 100, you would not do it, even though it's $5. It shouldn't matter, but it does. Emotions are necessary for decision making. Those without emotions cannot decide. So we decide with emotions. And we have evidence to show that if you don't have emotions, people who lack emotions for some brain damage, they cannot make decisions. Paying people to do things is a disincentive, especially when it's not a big sum of money. If we pay people, or if they pay for something, it's usually a disincentive, because especially if it's not a big enough. So we just take the money or pay the money, and it's not a good incentive. We would use whatever reason available to justify a decision or not taking one. Even unrelated reasons would be considered. We used any reason or excuse to justify a decision, or even if we don't take one. And we will use very obscure reasons as well. Mental accounts is having different perspective on money depending on the intended use. So that's what mental accounts is. People have different mental accounts, and for dependent on the intended use, even within the same person, there is different mental accounts, because the intended use is the important factor here. We tend to prefer one big bad event than a few smaller ones, while the opposite is true for good events. So we prefer one big bad than a few bads. So we would prefer that than having a lot of bad events, smaller ones. But the same is not true for good events. We prefer many small good events than one big good event. Side note, the professor is great at explaining things and relating them to real life. So that's what I said, similar to what I said in the review part. And he's a really great professor. I wish I could take a class with him, because he's great at explaining things and relating them to real life. He has great examples, some from his own life, and some even just the stories. Usually, even a study is essentially a story, and depends the way you say or you tell the story, and he's very good at it. People prefer flat fee over variable fees due to the pain they are carrying with each increment. Even though it's the same, it would come out to the same thing. They don't like variable fees because they feel the pain with every little increment. It takes some time to change between different mindsets. For example, between substitution and multiplication. It takes time. There's different mindsets, and it takes time, and there is many different other mindsets that just takes time for us to change. When presenting with opposite opinions and evidence, people just get more entrenched rather than convinced. We tend to think that if we show people reasons and evidence, facts, they would be convinced, but usually this is not the fact, and quite the opposite, they would get more entrenched. Behavior drive belief. People who do things convince themselves it was good. So we do, or we believe what we do. So behavior drive belief. We reason after the fact. Offering something big and then something small makes it more likely to succeed. If we sell something It's more likely to succeed if we offer something bigger and then something smaller. The study about subliminal messages turned out to be a fraud. Was Coke was like a very brief message in commercial, very brief commercial, something about Coke, and turned out to be a fraud. So there is no evidence to support subliminal messages work. Some stimulus doesn't go over the threshold to register in the conscious experience and stays in the subconscious. So not all stimulus is strong enough to move forward in a way to the conscious experience. Adding weights to important attributes could make a decision easier. If we add weights, we assign, okay, is important more than others. We can do percentages or numbers from 1 to 10, 1 to 5. If we assign those weights to attributes, it makes the decision making a little easier. Now, the decoy effect is adding a new option that changes the original choice. That's a decoy effect. If we had to choose from A to B, and then we add a C to it, it changes the original choice. That's the decoy effect. I think they had Sprite over Coke, and then they introduced a Diet Coke or something, or a Diet Sprite. So that's a third choice that changed that original choice. People tend to avoid extremes, both high and low. Good example is restaurant prices. People do not like extremes, and we can see that in restaurant prices, that people tend to choose the middle. They don't like the cheapest one, they don't like the most expensive ones. Side note, the professor is great at explaining concept and giving great examples, similar to what I wrote before, but he has great examples and he's very good at explaining some concepts. People prefer 80% lean meat over 20% fat, even as they are identical. There is no difference, but people prefer that. That's the framing effect, if I remember correctly. The effect of Google is that instead of remembering facts, we remember how to look for them. There is a brain region where we usually remember facts, but since we need to remember less facts, there is actually evidence to it that we remember less, but what we remember instead is where to look for facts. In order to avoid choice overload, it's good to know what we're looking for or to make the search more manageable. That's how we can work around choice overload, know what we look for, we need to know in advance, and that might help to make the search more manageable. We need to look for ways to make that more manageable. People tend to use reference points when they don't understand the figures. When we just give people figures to choose, they just use the reference point, whatever they find closer to it. That makes sense for them, which could be totally off, obviously. When the secret of Coke was leaked, the company simply said it's not the right formula. The brand is more important than the formula. And they managed the leak very well. They simply said, this is not the formula, and didn't say more than that. But ultimately, what's important there is not the formula, is the brand itself. And I would add to it is also the distribution, and that they have very efficient distribution all over the world. The halo effect changed people's view on things. The reward part of the brain is more active when thinking one is drinking from an expensive bottle of wine. So that's the halo effect. Well, it depends. We might think that people are more or less better at what they do based on the way they look, or we might think that even though that the wine tastes better because it has a higher price, even though it might be not true. And there's actual evidence that even our brain region, the reward region in the brain, lights up when we think we're drinking from an expensive bottle of wine. A good way to look at science is as a tree. Science is constantly tweaking and strengthening the limbs. So we can look at it as a tree. Because we're constantly building. There is a trunk, there is some basics, that's the trunk, and then there is the limbs. Then we keep changing, and we have theories. We test the theories and we tweak the theories. That's our the limbs. The reference point is one of the fundamental keys for decision making. We use the reference point, something close to it, and that helps us, or that's what we use as a fundamental key for decision making. Another one, there is four of them, but another one is resources. Whatever resources are available to us is another one, because sometimes there is more or less resources, and that might affect decision making. So that's for the notes. Again, very great book or course. I would recommend. Very good overview of decision making, biases, cognitive biases, and all of that, all the good stuff. Some psychology, some influence, some persuasion. It's a good bag. It's a good mixed bag of things. I would recommend. 5 out of 5. Thank you.